Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are on our second episode of our series on the miniseries The Pacific, which came out in 2010, part of the Hanks Spielberg World War II juggernaut. If you haven't listened to our first episode, you should go check it out. It's a banger, if we do say so ourselves. And this week we have another guest, which is really cool. It's our friend Merc, who is a fellow history nerd like us. We're really excited to get some of her insights into the Pacific. So welcome on, Rosie.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a special treat.
So we're going to be covering episodes 4 through 6 this week, sort of the middle meaty ones. Maybe we could give our general impressions of those 3 episodes. Mark, you could give us your general impressions of the whole show if you want to. Mark, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I like the middle part of the Pacific because we get more sledge and we get snafu, and I like them a lot. I like these episodes better, I think, than the first 3, even though in my many rewatches I've learned to really like Lucky's crew, so I like the beginning more than I used to, but I think it starts to get really into it from episode 4 on, so I'm excited to be talking about it.
I think this is maybe my favorite part of the show also because we have this really interesting crossover between the people who seem to know what they're doing and the people who are still learning what they're doing. That's like this episode. We have those two sort of or set of episodes, these 2 streams crossing. And I think that's a really interesting place to be in the show. This show has grown on me a lot as I've watched it and rewatched it. I watched it once a number of years ago and it was really hard. And I got to the end and said, okay, that's it. I've done it once. I don't need to do it again. And then came back to it during the pandemic and said, there's a lot here. Ended up reading, I should say, 2 of the memoirs that the show is based on. And there's a lot of really good, really interesting writing there. So coming back to it, having read the memoirs now and are rereading them, is giving me a newfound appreciation for the show.
Yeah, actually, now that you say that, it is interesting that the first 3 episodes are so Lecky heavy, and then kind of the last 4 episodes are really sledge heavy, and then this is kind of like the intersection point. Like, I guess I had never really thought of that before. Honestly, like, I called these the meaty episodes, but I would say there are some later episodes too. Like, this miniseries really never lets up. Like, episode 9 is a massive one. Like, sometimes I get to the end and I feel wrung out. I'm like, did I just watch an entire movie? It's like, no, that was just one episode. So we're really getting into the thick of it. I mean, we just came off of the Melbourne episode, the Great Debauch, as Lecky calls it, where they're all hanging out with women and they're drinking and they're having a good time and, letting loose as only people who have been in their horrendous situation can. And then now they're sort of getting back into it. So yeah, lots of weapons grade heavy shit coming for sure.
And can I just say, I kind of already forgot, but we also get Scott Gibson in this. And he's great. We've had him on the pod before, so if you want to go listen to that, you can.
Scott actually plays one of my personal favorite characters. And I think the reason that this set of episodes is maybe my favorite is because we get to meet Sledge and we also get to meet Andy Haldane, who is... There's a lot of things in this show about leadership, like what it means to be a leader. And so his character and the way that he gets introduced has a lot of interesting implications underneath for that kind of set of themes in the show too.
For sure. And I think Haldane really has, he leaves an outsized impression considering how few minutes he actually appears in the show when you watch it back.
Yeah, he's really not in it all that much.
Yeah.
With that said, I think we are ready to get into the show. We start out with Sledge going through training at Camp Elliott, California in December of 1943. And he's kind of not very good.
No, not at all.
The scene that we get shown is where he has to fire a mortar and it comes up short because he didn't understand the instructions or hear the instructions. And it's Jojo and Fuckface that are supposed to be his friends and he destroys them by accident. So
yeah,
this is the first training montage that we get in the show. So I think it's episode 1, we're introduced to Lecky, we're introduced to Basilone. They both kind of show up and they know what they're doing, but we're meeting Sledge as I don't know what I'm doing. and I just blew my friends up, apparently, in the middle of this training exercise. It's really kind of brutal. But also, we've had 3 episodes to figure out how this war works. And then we get this other character who doesn't know how the war works. And that's one of our introductions to him. I think it's really just an interesting kind of, this is who Sledge is at that point in the story.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, do we talk about this on the last episode about how in real life, he basically deliberately flunked out of officer school so that he could, go to the Pacific faster sort of thing. So yeah, I do think this is sort of a continuation of this really like naive, youthful character that we met a little bit in the first 3 episodes. And we're getting to see an extension of that. He's in training. It's a struggle. He's, barely keeping his head above water type thing.
I do wonder why they chose to give us Sledge's perspective of training, because Lucky also writes about getting into the Marines and they don't show you that. So it would have been maybe a logical thing to show Lucky because it's at the start of the show, but they chose not to do it, and I find that really interesting, and I wonder why that is.
Lecky and his H Company buddies arrive at Cape Gloucester on New Britain, which is another pretty isolated island in the middle of the Pacific, and they set up camp. Their new platoon commander is Second Lieutenant Lebec, played by Rohan Nichol, and he's a Canadian, so #Canada mention. And on a patrol, Lucky manages to ambush a small group of Japanese scouts. And this is a reference to something that happens in the book as well. And he must remain behind later when his friends fight off a bonsai charge with instructions to destroy vital intelligence if they're overrun. So just imagine, all your buddies are going to go and scrap with the Japanese and you can hear the fighting happening, but you have to stay behind. And if your camp gets overrun, it's your job to burn whatever is left so it doesn't fall into enemy hands.
There are 2 things that I noticed when I was rewatching this episode this morning. And it's when they arrive to Camp Gloucester, when they arrive to the island, there's a shot of them on the ship just looking at this really daunting but also relatively small island. And I wonder what was in these soldiers' heads looking at an island like that. If you have got to wonder, what am I fighting for? Because there's not anything you can see other than just jungle. And I like that they're showing them kind of looking at the island, and it just feels really daunting. And just Lucky's just great.
I think one of the things that always strikes me every time I watch this, and Mart, what you were saying about like looking at the island reminded me, every time we start an episode, we start with the big map and then we have to zoom in. And it's this island that either nobody knows the name of or you've never heard it before. There's a book by a military historian named John Keegan called The Face of Battle. And he talks about how in battle, soldiers really only care about what's happening about 10 feet to their left, 10 feet to their right, and 10 feet in front of them. I'm paraphrasing. He says it much better than that. But like the scale of your war is incredibly small. You care about the 15 guys that are right behind you, and that's it. And so, you look at this island and it's surrounded by ocean. This war is absolutely huge and enormous. You only care about your 15 guys right next to you, and everything else is whatever.
Yeah, and we talked last episode about how on the other end of New Britain is this massive Japanese airbase called Rabaul, and it was the center of the Japanese effort. Anywhere that you were on the ocean, if you were worried about getting bombed, the planes were probably coming from Rabaul, and so it was like a major objective to try and take it. But like, this is very incidental to Lucky and his pals. I mean, this is not what they're imagining when they're, disembarking on Cape Gloucester.
Another thing that I really like is we get to see Lucky write to Vera again, and it's Christmas Eve, and he writes, "Dear Vera, I just wanted you to know that I'm safe tonight." And I think we all know what happens with those letters later. I won't spoil it yet. But it's such a nice way to guide you along by using that correspondence.
Because you kind of see a little bit of like how Lecky is, I'll say, deteriorating a little bit over time, is he's very actively writing these letters and they actually mean something. And then over time, you start to see that, and I think he has another letter in one of the episodes we're talking about today where you realize that he's not actually going to be sending these letters. He's writing them just for himself to sort of vent a little bit.
I don't remember. That's interesting. I wonder, I didn't get to finish my rewatch, so I wonder if I'm going to notice now that you've said that.
This is also the episode where I think it's Runner who's talking about the Japanese, and they're talking about, I think it was like a bonsai charge. And he says they're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. And like he says, or they just really fucking hate us. And this is not the only time someone tries to suss out Japanese motivations, tries to kind of put themselves in someone else's shoes. There's a bit later where it's, why don't they just surrender? Because they're Japanese. And then there's a bit with Snafu talking about how the Japanese are fighting because of duty to the emperor, duty to God. But really, I thought it was interesting that they included that because I feel like in the European theater of war, there's less of this sense of the enemy as this inscrutable other. And by including that, they really put us in the shoes of these Marines who like maybe have never met a Japanese person and they really have no sense of this culture that they perceive as alien.
I feel like we've talked about this on another episode before where the Germans are people that look like them and kind of sound like them and fight like them. So it's a very different sort of enemy than the European war is.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to add that Lebec, our Canadian, who kills himself in this series of episodes, he's actually based on a real figure from Lucky's memoir, who he calls Lieutenant Commando, because of course he doesn't call anyone by their real names. The real Lieutenant Commando was only wounded on Cape Gloucester, and he died later at Peleliu, so that little scene is a fabrication, but I do feel like it's pretty effective at relaying how sick to the back teeth everyone is of being in the fucking jungle.
When I was doing my reread, I remembered that Lieutenant Commando is a character and went to go find him. And one of the other characters or set of characters in Lucky's memoir is a group of native scouts that are working with Lucky's company while they're trying to clear the jungle. And I thought it was interesting that the show chooses not to include those characters. That's a group, as we talk more about the Pacific theater as a whole, that doesn't get brought up a lot and is getting more attention now as different historians take a look at who was here and who wasn't here. And so how do we choose to include or not include characters in a particular story? Kind of stuck out to me this time around.
For sure. And we talked about when we did South Pacific, I read the book that it's based on, and the person who wrote that had also served in the Pacific, and just extensive interactions with Indigenous people who lived there. And yeah, it's definitely an interesting choice, which I didn't notice the first time I watched the Pacific, but it's a choice to maintain this idea of whiteness versus the Japanese or whatever. Like there's only these like two factions. There's nobody in between.
We get to see Lucky and his relationship to the jungle a lot. And he says, our enemy isn't the Japanese anymore. Now it's the jungle and the rain. And it's really effective. And I know there's a really good quote that we're about to get from Sam about the rain. But this scene in general, or this portion of the show, is really dark because Lebec shoots himself. And then there's a scene where Lucky has a gun.
That's the one where he has the gun and his officer steals the gun and Lucky steals the gun back.
Is that the scene where he says, I'm not in your tent, sir?
That's the one, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Being miserable really just cranks up his shitheadery to 11.
And technically speaking, he is not in the tent. He's outside looking like a very sad, wet dog.
It's true. Yeah. So I pulled this quote from Helmet for My Pillow because I'm like, I'll never be able to describe it as well as Robert Lucky can describe it, and he was there. So he says, nothing could stand against it. A letter from home had to be read and reread and memorized, for it fell apart in your pocket in less than a week. A pair of socks lasted no longer. A pack of cigarettes became sodden and worthless unless smoked that day. Pocket knife blades rusted together. Watches recorded the period of their own decay. Rain made garbage of the food. Pencils swelled and burst apart. Fountain pens clogged and their points separated. Rifle barrels turned blue with mold and had to be slung upside down to keep out the rain. Bullets stuck together in the rifle magazines, and machine gunners had to go over their belts daily, extracting and oiling and reinserting the bullets to prevent them from sticking to the cloth loops. And everything lay damp and sodden and squashy to the touch, exuding that steady, musky reek that is the jungle's own, that individual odor of decay rising from vegetable life so luxuriant, growing so swiftly that it seems to hasten to decomposition from the moment of birth. It was into this green hell that we were inserted a day or two after the march from Tuali Sagsag, and here was fought that battle with the rainforest. Here the jungle and the men were locked in a conflict far more basic than our shooting war with the Japanese, for here the struggle was for existence itself.
Applause for this amazing writing, too. It's such a poetic way of making it really abundantly clear how shitty it was to be in the jungle.
It's just relentless. This sentence goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And Sledge talked about that too, about how it's really hard to impress upon someone who wasn't there how much of the rain and the mud and the filth were so ubiquitous. And that was really your sort of day-to-day sense of combat was, like Sledge talked about, he for like 80 days on Okinawa, he couldn't shave and your beard gets full of like gunk and dirt and rifle oil and all kinds of stuff. And it's just everything stinks. It's just this, you don't even feel like a human being. You feel so degraded.
And that's something that, like, as we're watching it on a TV screen, we can't necessarily get a sense of. As people have talked about, well, how do you tell a war story? Can you ever come up with all of those incredibly vivid, gross, extremely human feelings of, I haven't been able to wash for 90 days. I haven't been able to shave.
Yeah, not to forget all the diseases too, all the jungle diseases, and skip the fact that Lucky has enuresis.
Yeah, we see it in the show. He's basically, because of his anxiety, he's just wetting his pants a lot. But real life Lucky had malaria, I think 8 or 9 times, and he had dengue fever once, which apparently was like fucking brutal. He said it was worse than like all the other malaria bouts put together. So,
and we do get a little bit of it in the show, and we get I'm dying Sledge from the snafu. But I think it's really difficult to show the extent of how bad it is on TV without it becoming just too depressing to watch.
Yeah,
I think that's true. And even too, at this point in the show, Lecky is talking about, well, I'm fighting the rain, but they're also kind of fighting themselves. Is, hey, I still want to feel like a human person. I want to feel like I can own things like the chest that he collects. I want to have control over my own body. And he doesn't even have that. And so that's like the worst part of the enuresis of that bedwetting is I don't even have control over myself.
For sure. Very like emasculating as well. Yeah, so on Pavuvu, May of 1944, this is kind of their resting spot once they're done on Cape Gloucester, but no one wants to be on Pavuvu. Lecky says that the name means the death of hope, which is, of course, probably not what it means, but that's what it seems like to him. And I actually have a quote from With the Old Breed. Eugene Sledge is relating a conversation, and it says, I think the Marine Corps has forgotten where Pavuvu is, one man said. I think God has forgotten where Pavuvu is, came a reply. God couldn't forget because he made everything. Then I bet he wishes he could forget he made Pavuvu. So yeah, it's not a glorious tropical paradise by any means. And Lecky, when he's there, his enuresis is not getting better. So he gets sent to a military hospital under the care of Dr. Grant, played by Matt Craven. And while he's there, he encounters Ronnie Gibson, played by Tom Budgett, who was formerly a member of his platoon. We had seen Ronnie earlier in the movie strangle a Japanese soldier with his bare hands, so he obviously was not doing well. And Lecky is, he's a little upset that he's been sent to somewhere where, quote unquote, they take people's razor blades away because they think they're going to hurt themselves. And so he requests to return to his friends, and he ends up getting sent back to the line. Well, I will say that the real Ronnie Gibson is referred to as the kid in Lecky's memoir, and he was actually in this hospital because one day there was this plane that had come for, I don't know if it was dropping off supplies or whatever, and they heard the motor running, and they were like, who the fuck started the plane? And they went over, and Ronnie was in the plane, and they were like, what are you trying to do right now? And he's like, I'm going to fly this plane home. So he obviously was not doing well, and he had to be taken off the line for his own well-being.
We get to see some Red Cross nurses in this scene. I think it might be before he gets sent to the hospital. I don't remember. But
they're Navy nurses. Yeah, they're nurses on the hospital ship.
That's it. You get to see like the Coca-Cola bottles, like the typical American things from home. And it almost feels like it should be something heartwarming, but all the guys are just not interested in being cheered up because it's just too dark for them to get out of that place. I mean, the island looked kind of beautiful, but there's like rotten coconuts and all that sort of shit. So it's not as great as they make it look.
I gotta imagine the bugs are heinous as well. You probably never get any rest. Everyone's always getting malaria. They're probably getting mosquito bitten from morning till night.
I'm trying to remember where in the show they have the scarecrow that has, he didn't take his Atabrine on it. Atabrine is an anti-malarial drug, and it will turn you yellow if you take it consistently enough.
It's like a liver issue, I guess.
Maybe. I'm not really sure kind of what the active ingredient in that is.
Can you tell me, Merc, how many women served in the Navy Nurse Corps during World War II?
I can. So there were 11,000 women in service with the Navy, and they did pretty much everything you could imagine. So we see some here who are serving on a Navy hospital vessel. We also see some who are helping in the hospital, that land-based hospital. The Navy also ran flight evac nursing services as well. So these are women who are going to be supervising patients while they're on a plane back to whatever part of the medical evacuation chain is going to be able to handle their injuries the best. That's actually one of the reasons why this show kind of edges ahead in my favorite Tom Hanks miniseries things. Many folks who know me know that one of my personal interests is women in wartime. And so the fact that this is one of the shows that shows some of those members of the military in the midst of doing the work that they're supposed to be doing is pretty cool to me, even though they don't have any lines.
Hell yeah.
They will learn eventually to just include the women and also give them lines.
Maybe.
Here's hoping.
We all saw Masters of the Air and what they did to poor Sandra, but
Well, at least the nurses, the dollies, get something to do.
Yes, that is true. The hospital sequence to me seems just really interesting because you see Lecky and he's like, I'm here to be healed. I'm not sure that I want to be. I don't want to be grouped in with these people. I'm not like them. You see him really strongly talking or discussing the idea that if you're here, you've given up or you don't care enough about the people you left behind. And so it's ultimately I don't want to give up on my friends, the guys that I've been fighting with for the last however many months, that bond of, hey, this is terrible and awful, and nothing we say or do is going to change that. But at least I know that I'm with someone who cares about me in some small way, that if I'm there, I can be making a difference because these people are with me.
yeah, for sure.
And I think that concept of, hey, where am I? What am I doing? Who am I with? Kind of carries over into episode 5. We start the episode and John Basilone is on his War Bonds tour. He's back in the States. He's got his beautiful, lovely dress uniform on. He's kissing, oh my goodness, what is her name?
I don't think I put it in the notes either.
I know she's played by Anna Torv.
What's her name?
She's a very beautiful starlet, Hollywood celebrity, anyways.
It's Virginia Gray. I like that we get to see the War Bonds tour, even though I find it kind of boring as a story, but I think it's good that they try to show you all different sides of the war, and this was definitely something that did happen to John Basilone. And also we've seen it in other movies, so it's maybe not as exciting as the rest.
Like, I think that's part of kind of the narrative tension of this part of the story is we've been rat-a-tat, bang, boom, guns fire, things explode. And John has been in the middle of that, so much in the middle that he's been awarded the Medal of Honor. And now he's back stateside. He's got flashbulbs going on off in his face. He's got his arm wrapped around a beautiful woman. And he doesn't know what to do with himself. He's back home and he's having to interpret this experience that he's just had and make it sound good. And he doesn't quite know how to do that. We've got in this episode a scene where he's talking to some staff at the hotel where he's staying. And one says, oh, I'm going into boot camp. Like, what can you tell me? And he's like, boot camp's a breeze. You sleep in on Mondays. You can tell the guy is like, okay, so, but real advice? And he doesn't know what to say. He says, keep your head down, keep moving, listen to your NCOs, which is kind of the moment where we meet him at the beginning of the show. He's an NCO. Chesty Puller is saying, hey, you guys are the heart and soul of the Marine Corps. You're the guys that always get stuff done. And now John is in this place where he's not getting stuff done. He doesn't feel like he's a part of that process, that organization anymore. And then he gets to talk to his brother, and his advice to his brother is a little different. His advice to his brother is, don't feel like you have to prove anything to anyone. And he says it very seriously and very intentionally.
I mean, sure, because his brother is like this big war hero, right? and he doesn't necessarily want to be that, but he's been made into one, and he doesn't want his brother to feel like he also has to be the hero.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of studies now that show that for a lot of people who have been in combat, the thing that sort of terrorizes them, the thing that sort of is the impetus for a lot of their PTSD is not being afraid of dying, not seeing their friends die, it's doing the killing. It's the fact that everyone at home is like, you're a hero, you're a hero. And they're like, I have snuffed out a life. And like trying to reconcile that in your own mind, and seeing John Basilone wrestle with that as everyone calls him a hero and creates these sort of dramatized versions of his exploits. And he's like, I was just trying to survive. It involved a lot of killing, and I don't know how I feel about all this. Yeah, so Eugene finally arrives in the Pacific just as his buddy Sid is heading home. Sid won a lottery, I think, to be able to rotate home. And I do remember in the book Lecky being pissed about this. Not not necessarily pissed that there was a lottery, but pissed that he wasn't eligible for it because he had been in the brig. And you're not eligible for the lottery if you've been a brig rat. So, and we talked a little bit about this last episode, Eugene and Sid having this sort of surreal reunion on Pavuvu where Sid has already been in the shit and has one eye on going home, and Eugene is just getting there, and he's like, I need some advice. And Sid is like, there's nothing I can tell you that's gonna articulate what it's like. And we also meet some members of Sledge's platoon who are relevant figures in the plot. We have Robert Oswald, played by Andrew Lees, Bill Layden, played by Brendan Fletcher, Corporal Mariel Snafu Shelton, played by Rami Malek, Jay DeLoe, played by Dylan Young, Sergeant R.V. Bergen, played by Martin McCann, Captain Andrew Akak Haldane, played by Scott Gibson, Gunnery Sergeant Elmo Gunny Haney, played by Gary Sweet, and First Lieutenant Edward Hillbilly Jones, played by Leon Ford.
The reunion between Sid and Eugene is probably one of my favorite scenes because it's such a before and after comparison. And Eugene is still a kid and Sid is no longer a kid. And it's the distance between them where you can just tell that everything is now different. It's really well acted and also really well written. I want to say I just really enjoy that.
It's so interesting getting to see the initial few days of these guys all meeting each other and getting the lay of the land. I mean, at first, Sledge doesn't seem to get on super well with Bill Layden, but if you've ever heard Henry Sledge talk about it, Eugene Sledge's son, he says that when Eugene Sledge passed away, Bill Layden was the first person that he called. So it's sort of the basis of these like lifelong friendships.
One of the things that always strikes me about that meeting scene between Eugene and Sid is I think Sid starts that scene with, I don't believe it. So even he, knowing who he is and what he's been and what he's seen, is looking at this guy that he's known for forever and being like, oh, you're here. Like, I don't believe that you got here. I don't believe that I'm here. And just look at how different we are now. And then, of course, they get into this little tussle and unfortunately roll straight to the feet of Sledge's new commanding officer, Haldane, who says, is this some rite of greeting new to the Corps? And of course, Sledge doesn't know what to say. And Sid is like, no, sir, I'm sorry. Even the differences between, hey, what do you do when an officer talks to you is readily apparent.
Yeah. I pulled the quote from With the Old Breed where he introduces Captain Haldane for the first time because I just think it's really interesting that, I mean, spoilers, I guess, but Akak does not survive the war. And so this perception of him that we get is very much from Sledge's point of view. And it's the point of view of someone who really looked up to and respected him. And I don't know, it's like a very particular point of view of someone. It almost sort of canonizes them and it makes it maybe a little bit harder to relate to them as a person. But I'll just read you the quote. Acclaimed by superiors and subordinates alike for his leadership abilities, Captain Haldane was the finest and most popular officer I ever knew. All of the Marines in Company K shared my feelings. Called the skipper, he had a strong face full of character, a large prominent jaw, and the kindest eyes I ever saw. No matter how often he shaved or how hard he tried, he always had a 5 o'clock shadow. He was so large that the combat pack on his back reminded me of the bulge of his wallet, while mine covered me from neck to waist. Although he insisted on strict discipline, the captain was a quiet man who gave orders without shouting. He had a rare combination of intelligence, courage, self-confidence, and compassion that commanded our respect and admiration. We were thankful that Akak was our skipper, felt more secure in it, and felt sorry for other companies not so fortunate.
And what an introduction, because we've also seen a large number of Lecky's officers who don't care about him, who steal from him, who are people that he served with and then got promoted. And there's a lots of commentary about, oh, the promotion changed him. But from Sledge's point of view, Haldane is just, he's the best. But again, you only see him for a short time. And, how much is that colored by, I just got here and I don't know what's going on. And this person is going to make the world make sense for me.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting choice because, in real life, I think Haldane was, 25 or something like that. And
he wasn't super old.
Yeah. And they cast Scott Gibson, who I think was 39 when he acted the role. And so he does imbue it with a kind of like maturity and gravitas that Sledge attributes to this man, who in real life was like quite a young guy and maybe didn't 100% have a handle on things all the time.
Another thing I really like about the scene where Sid and Eugene reunite and have the little scrap and then get kind of reprimanded but very gently by Haldane is that you get the little mirror image of them is Haldane and Hillbilly together. And I really like that.
And here's two guys who have had sort of parallel experiences. Hillbilly has gotten this field promotion. They're both people who are in positions of authority. And yet, as they're walking away, they have that moment of young guys. We used to be just like them once a long time ago.
Right.
I wanted to talk about when Sid is leaving to go home. Eugene is trying to catch him to say goodbye to him, and he misses him. And I just really like that scene where you get to see him checking all the barracks, and everyone's like, no, I think they've already shipped out. And then you see him running toward the ocean, and all you see is the ship already gone. And I just think that's one of my favorite scenes. Eugene and Sid never get to be at the same spot in the same time. While they do obviously meet on the island, they just keep missing each other. And it breaks my heart a little because they're such good friends, but I imagine that must kind of change you for life.
Yeah, similar but separate nightmares, I'm sure. And it sets us up at the end of the war for Eugene getting home, and like Sid is just as traumatized, but he's had like 2 years to sort of figure out how to fit that into his everyday life. Whereas for Eugene, it's still really fresh.
That shot of Sledge where he's standing on the pier and he's got his uniform that's still all put together. He's still wearing his canvas leggings. He's very much, I'm still the new guy. And he just looks so small and so lonely and so betrayed. Like, my friend didn't come to find me to tell me that he was leaving. In the same way that, I can't tell you what battle's like is I'm not going to say goodbye because I've had to say goodbye to a lot of people without actually saying goodbye. And I don't actually want to do that with you. It's see you later and hopefully we'll cross paths again.
The only thing he has left from Sid is his little pin that was on his uniform before.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only little keepsake.
We have to talk about the scene where Lucky and Sledge meet, because this, as far as we know, didn't happen in real life. It's not impossible that Lucky and Sledge could have crossed paths because they were on Pavuvu at the same time, but this is a little artistic license, but I don't hate it. I like that they made, the two storylines cross over a little bit. And Sid was in Lucky's company, Eugene's best friend. So yeah, there's this little moment where Sledge goes into Lucky's tent because Lucky has this collection of books. And
the Lending Library of the Pacific.
Yes. And, they're talking about what they believe in. Sledge at this point we know is religious, and he's got his own copy of a Bible that he's brought with him. And he asks Lucky what he believes in. And Lucky says, I believe in ammunition, which is metal as hell. I do love it as a quote.
Like, when we first meet Lucky in the show, he is walking into a church. So at one point in time, he was religious. And at some point that has flipped. And he and Sledge have this great back and forth. At some point, he says something like, if all this stuff has happened, then God's a sadist. And I don't feel like believing in him anymore. It's a really interesting, what if these two people met, but also these two, I'm at different points in my life. I'm at different points in my journey of trying to figure out how the universe works. I think as a storytelling technique, it's really cool. And again, it's emphasizing Sledge is the new guy. He doesn't quite know how it works around here. And Lecky's like, just you wait. You're going to stop believing in God and start believing in ammunition.
Yeah. And the thing I love about it is that, because you're right. I mean, where this is coming up from for Lecky is that he's just been dragged through this meat grinder for months on end. But when he says that, it's like, he doesn't really feel that way. I mean, Lecky's whole thing throughout the show is that it's like it's all about his friends. And he says this very nihilistic, I believe in ammunition, but as the show goes on, as you watch him, you're like, he doesn't really think that. You know, that's not really like how he feels in his heart.
Well, and even at the end of his memoir, he says something about like, I pray that nobody ever has to see war again. He hasn't, at least at the end of his written memoir, it doesn't seem like he's totally given up on God and religion. We're just kind of catching him in a particularly bad moment.
For sure. Do you want to talk about the book?
I do want to talk about the book. I am one of those strange people who actually looks at the books the props department puts in people's hands. And I particularly like this prop because I think it's really symbolic and cool. So this is the book that Eugene gave to Sid before he shipped out. It's Kipling's Barracks Room Ballads. It was published in 1899. I think everybody is very familiar with Rudyard Kipling. He's one of the like most recognizable poets of the English language. And he's really commonly associated with empire. This is the guy that writes the backdrop to the end of the 19th century and Queen Victoria's Little Wars. And so one of the poems that's in this book happens to be the poem Mandalay, which is set to music by Bing Crosby. It's also a poem that a lot of British Army officers who serve in the China-Burma India theater kind of use to talk about their service. It shows up in The Crown in one episode, and masterfully narrated by Charles Dance, as only Charles Dance can do. And so that's one of the poems that's in this book. Ship me somewhere east of Suez, where the rest is like the worst, where there ain't no 10 commandments and a man can raise a thirst. It's a very Orientalist poem. And so Sid accepts this book, takes it with him, and then ends up giving the book to Lecky because he doesn't need it. And so Sledge comes back across it and is like, oh, this book that I gave my friend. And so to me, I see this book and see Sid is giving up this book because he's kind of giving up on home. He's giving up on this younger person that he was when he accepted the book. But he's also sort of giving up on the idea that anything Kipling says in here is worth listening to. This is silly poetry. This is a very naive gift that his friend has given him. But nothing in this book is true. Nothing is anywhere near what they've experienced here. It's not a true picture of the place that they've been. And of course, Sledge picks it up and is like, oh, I see. It's here because it wasn't super useful to my friend. Maybe it won't be useful to me.
Well, and Sid accepts this book from him, and Eugene says, oh, just if you need something to read on the train. And rather than being read and left on the train, that book comes with Sid through Guadalcanal, through Gloucester, through all this horrible shit that he goes through. And then it's like you said, he's ready to leave his childhood behind in the jungle. Everything that he was is gone, and his illusions about what war would be like, what life would be like, have been shattered. And now he's like, I don't need this book anymore.
But he does give it to Lecky, who will look after it, so it's not completely discarded.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sledge has his first taste of violence in combat on Peleliu.
I have a quote from With the Old Breed, where he says of Peleliu, perhaps we can say of Peleliu as the Englishman Robert Graves said of World War I, that it gave us infantrymen so convenient a measuring stick for discomfort, grief, pain, fear, and horror that nothing since has greatly daunted us, but it also brought new meanings of courage, patience, loyalty, and greatness of spirit, incommunicable, we found, to later times. As I crawled out of the abyss of combat and over the rail of the Sea Runner, I realized that compassion for the sufferings of others is a burden to those who have it. As Wilfred Owen's poem Insensibility puts it so well, those who feel most for others suffer most in war. So Peleliu sucked.
The reason they're on Peleliu, by the way, is to take an airfield.
Yeah, there's a scene where they've had their first day of combat. At this point, as they're landing on the beach, we see Sledge is coming in there with these guys that he perceives to be Old Hat. You know, the Snafu and Bergie and these other guys. In the vessel on their way to the beach, Snafu just throws up on the ground. But there's one scene where you see Bergie's face and he's just like staring off into the middle distance, you know, no doubt imagining 1,000 terrible deaths for himself. And so Sledge goes into combat and he sees all these guys that he thought, you know, these guys are Old Hat, they'll know what they're doing. And then he sees that, oh, you never like get used to it. It never gets easy. You never get well versed in combat in that way. And there's at the end of their first day, it's dark and they're, sitting in the dark, waiting to be shelled in their foxholes. And his buddy, Robert Oswalt, tells this story about seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. And he talks about how before you see the Grand Canyon, you can't imagine the scope of the Grand Canyon. You simply can't envision it. You just have to see it for yourself. And he's sort of like drawing this illusion of that's what combat is like.
But he never says that. He just shares the story of the Grand Canyon. And there's this unspoken moment between them where they're like, okay, we get it now. Like, there's no way that anybody could have actually said what this was going to be like.
I think Snafu throwing up on the ground is very effective too, because Eugene is clearly very intimidated by him after being kind of razzed on during his arrival on Pavuvu, and he kind of sets him up to do a shitty job. So when we first see their dynamic, it's very Eugene not really liking him and being kind of afraid of him. And then even this guy throws up on the ground. So it's really effective.
Yeah. And on Lecky's side of things, poor Sweet Hoosier is wounded and it looks really bad. He's bleeding all over the place. And Lecky is calling for a corpsman, but it's so loud. There's shells falling all around them. You think that maybe help is not going to make it. And you really see Lecky with this palpable sense of fear. This is like the snarky guy who believes in ammunition is torn away. And you see this guy who's very frightened that he's going to lose his friend. And then Hoosier's evacuated and we don't really see any more of him for the rest of the show.
Episode 6. So Sid, as we know, gets to go home. So he visits and reassures Eugene's parents back in Alabama. And you can tell that he's reassuring them and saying, look, he's got the best guys around him, he'll be fine. But you can also tell that he doesn't necessarily think that he'll be fine.
Yeah.
Well, and he and Sledge's dad have a moment where they're looking across the table, and what Sid is saying is very much for the benefit of Mrs. Sledge. But Mr. Sledge, Dr. Sledge, was in World War I. And he and Sid have a moment where he's like, I know what you're saying out loud is maybe not the truth, but thank you for saying it so that she's okay.
100%. And the way that scene starts, the Sledges have some hired help, I guess. And one of them comes in and tells Mrs. Sledge that there's a man in a uniform at the door. And you can tell that's what's passing through her mind is someone's bringing me a telegram that one of my sons is dead. And when Sid comes in, there's just like palpable relief,
Yeah, because his brother is in Europe, as he alludes to during his conversation with Lecky. There's another war going on. Well, you don't care unless you got a brother there. Well, I have a brother there. Lecky's like, nice for you.
Yeah, guess you get to care. Yeah. On Peleliu, the Marines are still trying to take the airfield. It's hot as fuck. I'm sure we can't even conceive of just like the sheer volume of noise, because even when I was watching it in my house, I had the volume turned up and the cat was like, what the fuck is going on? I mean, it's like Armageddon. It's like Judgment Day. And I think Lecky says something to that effect in his book when you're in the middle of a shelling. It's like you really can't conceive of like the sheer noise and what that does to your nervous system. And Sledge's one of his little fresh green Marine buddies, Oswald, is killed as they cross the airfield. And that night, Sledge has a little heart-to-heart with Haldane, and he's talking about how he's like, I was really scared today. And Haldane is like, you know what? We're all scared. But there have been all these wars fought in history, and I keep myself going by my belief that in this war, our cause is just, which is sort of an interesting little bit of sentiment to include there.
I think it's the taking of the airfield is so brutal because there's hardly any cover. It's hard to imagine if you've not seen it, but it's just slabs of concrete or whatever it is that the airfield is made of. They're just tripping over bodies and tripping over like holes in the ground, and there's no cover whatsoever. So it's just like you have to run out into the open and just hope that you can make it to the other side in one piece, and many people don't.
One of the things that I don't think is discussed kind of as we start this battle is that as with many islands in the Pacific, Peleliu is a coral island, which means that if you are crossing a flat surface, there's no opportunity for you to go down. You cannot dig through coral. It's incredibly hard. And so, the airfield is this engineered surface that's meant to be flat and easy to navigate and absolutely terrible to cross. But they've had several days of, I can't dig a foxhole the way I'd like to dig a foxhole. I have no cover. I have nowhere to go.
We talked about this in our South Pacific episode quite extensively. And another thing that is shown to us in the TV show is that they have no water because the Japanese have poisoned all the little ponds and whatever sources of water there are. So imagine being out in the scorching heat and not having any water on you. I mean, good luck. And in the show, it's maybe 10 minutes, but it took, I think, a whole day to cross the airfield.
And just the absolute relentless nature of not having any water is, I know I have to go forward. I know I'm thirsty. They have that scene where they're passing around the different water bottles.
Yeah.
Canteens, thank you. And no one has any. And then I think it's Oswald that has some in his canteen and they share it around. Or the scene of Lecky, who is looking at the body of this dead comrade and goes into his canteen and he does the action, he goes for it, and he looks up and sees the other two people in the foxhole are kind of staring at him like, what are you doing? Like, you're desecrating the dead. You're doing something that maybe you shouldn't be. And Lecky ends up putting the canteen back, even though there's nothing in it.
Yeah. And I just to rewind a little bit to that Haldane bit about their cause being just, I always just think it's interesting. I mean, Hanks and Spielberg are such a big part of this late 90s, early 2000s, World War II nostalgia stuff and this idea of the good war and, where it's very black and white and the Americans were the good guys and they won. And then that was sort of used to justify many things that happened in the decades afterwards that, maybe it should have been used for. And yeah, just including this character who is the absolute epitome of an American war hero. And we don't really know about him as a person. We don't know what he's like when he's in his foxhole. We only know what he's like when he interfaces with Eugene Sledge. And, just having him be the person to talk about, our cause is just. This idea of the good war being brought into this show again. And, and Haldane being the one who seems to know what he's talking about. And he always knows what to say. And, this is just wisdom that gets handed down. I don't know. I always think it's neat.
And that he's saying it to Sledge, who's kind of the young, naive, impressionable, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. I'm looking for advice or direction. And so, the advice and direction is that our cause is just.
And his leadership style is also shown as very different to many other depictions of it from other characters, because there is a soldier, I don't remember who it is, who has kind of lost his mind. And he's very kind to him and says, we need you over here to count what is it?
Bandages, maybe?
Yes. So he's this very kind, gentle man in this portrayal, whereas most of the time we get to see people shouting, and he obviously says that in his book that he doesn't shout. But it's so almost, what's the word I'm trying to use? The opposite of typical. Atypical.
He's an outlier.
Yeah, it's a very atypical portrayal of leadership in the Marines, for sure.
Well, and they're definitely setting us up for the absolute wallop that it's going to cause to Sledge and his compatriots when Haldane gets, taken away from them, their safety blanket when he's gone.
Haldane actually has to leave to get their orders changed, because they don't want to do them because it's unacceptable casualties time if they go and do what they've been ordered to do, because they have to root out several Japanese machine gun emplacements in the hills. And he says to Lieutenant Jones, if I don't return, the company is yours, I think he says. And you can tell that everybody's like, where's he going? Why is he leaving? What's going on? And that night, Lieutenant Jones has to kill one of his own because he's having a nightmare, he's making a lot of noise, and it puts them all in danger. And this is his first time being put in charge, and he immediately has to make that decision. And it's kind of brutal.
Well, you have this strong contrast between, an unacceptable casualty is I have to charge headfirst into this very unwinnable situation, and an acceptable casualty, which is one of my soldiers is jeopardizing all of the rest of them. And you watch as the camera kind of moves around between all these different faces of them trying to figure out kind of what they want to do or think about this action that's just happened. And I think they're all kind of weighing the when do I become an acceptable casualty? That's a huge thing is, hey, I'm just another cog in the machine sometimes, but sometimes I'm a part of the team.
Right. And like, I mean, World War II is the largest mass mobilization in history. It's hard to feel like you matter when there's just millions of people involved.
It also kind of mirrors the scene in an earlier episode where the medic is killed, but that's by accident. It's now changed, and this one, they have to kill him because otherwise they'll all die.
But even like that idea of this person is a threat, someone's moving around in the dark and I have to shoot them. I don't know who or what they are. And maybe the second one, the scene that we're in right now, is even more scary because you do know exactly who that person is. And so you know exactly what the stakes are. It's not that you're shooting against an enemy you don't know. You're shooting an enemy that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And Lecky has not had a fucking nightmare cast the first stone, right? Like, yeah. So unfortunately, Lecky's crew, more bad news. Runner is wounded, and Lecky he's going to go and get him a corpsman. He's also trying to go get a radio. Everything's really chaotic. I mean, it's just, you don't necessarily know where the other guys in your unit are even. And there's just people everywhere. There's shells falling. It's a whole thing. And as he's going to get a corpsman, Lecky is struck by the concussive blast of an artillery shell, and it sort of knocks him against a tree and really knocks some sense into him, I guess. He gets evacuated. He has to be taken away on a hospital ship. His injuries are pretty severe, and he and Runner reunite because they are both so severely wounded that they're going home. And I absolutely love the scene where they reunite because Lecky is sitting there looking so down in the dumps. He's sitting in a wheelchair. His face is all fucked up. He's pushing around these really sad looking canned peaches on a tray, which is kind of a callback to earlier where they decided that his nickname was Peaches because he shotgunned a can of peaches and then threw up everywhere because his system wasn't accustomed to it. And Runner comes, and then Lecky turns around and sees him, and just the look on his face, like, he's like, I tried to get back to you. Like, I tried to get you a corpsman. And Runner's like, Lecky, I know. And it's just, you can see everything you need to know about Robert Lecky in that scene where it's like, he's very like vulnerable. Everything that sort of was protecting him, like the layer of snark and sarcasm has all been ripped away because, he's gone through this terrible situation and he thought his friend was dead. And I don't know. I just think it's lovely. I think it's one of the best scenes in the miniseries.
You really get that strong sense, as you get from a lot of his scenes, that what he really cares about is the other people that he's with. And more than anything else in the world, he doesn't want to be a hero. He doesn't need a medal. What he needs to know is that he did the best job possible for the guys that he was with. I mean, it means so much to him to like tell Runner, like, I was trying. I didn't just leave you there. And Runner says, I know.
Yeah, he's like, don't worry. The people who are your friends can see past that exterior. Like, we're fully aware.
When I watched this episode for the first time, and when it ended like it did with this scene, this was one of the things I don't like about the Pacific, because this is the last time we'll see them for a while. And it's that disjointedness that the Pacific kind of suffered from, which gets less the more you watch it because you know what's going on. But it's one of the things that makes the Pacific harder to follow if you're a first-time watcher.
Because we do kind of lose Lecky as the main character here, and it's like, it can feel a little abrupt, yeah, for sure.
And he's been with us from the very start, too. And I'll miss him. That's basically what I'm saying, is I'll miss Lecky in the rest of the episodes.
One of the things I do like, though, is that the way Band of Brothers ends is pretty, we get this sort of voiceover that's like, everybody went home, here's what they did. And episode 10 of the Pacific is largely, the war ended and everyone has to try and figure things out, whatever that looks like. And we get to see them go home and try and make sense of their lives. Lecky going home and having to stay in his childhood bedroom, and
which is full of stuff.
Yeah, and just and we do get to see that, which I really love. I think episode 10 is underrated.
I like it too. I don't know if I liked it the first time I watched it. Again, it's one of those episodes that is maybe different from the rest of the show, but it's also nice to have a little bit of a breather after episode 9, which is probably the most brutal of all of them. So it's nice to get to wind down in a sort of quieter, still very serious and very heartbreaking to watch. But at least it doesn't have to be this senses heightened ending for once.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that always sticks out to me about the Pacific is that it's a very personal show. You get very deeply invested in each of these individual characters and the group that they're with. To have that break with Lecky, whom you've come to know and love, and not see him for another 3 episodes, 4 episodes, and not get the resolution that you're looking for, it is really hard as a first-time watcher because they lean so heavily on the memoirs that are kind of stringing this thing together.
We say goodbye to most of the characters from all the kind of gangs except for Eugene, right? I think we get to see Chuckler maybe in a coming episode, but other than that, we don't really get to see any of the old guys. That makes it difficult again. If you watch it for the first time, you kind of lose your thread a little bit after this episode. You're like, where has everybody gone? But they've just all either rotated home or they're like incapacitated or dead.
So one of the things that I was thinking about as, we're talking about the sort of disconnected war, we're losing all these people. We still don't even know where we are because we keep jumping around this really big map, is another book. This one is actually about the war in Europe. It's called Sheer Misery. It's by a historian named Mary Louise Roberts. And she writes about the physicality of war and how we don't address that enough. For soldiers who fought, the war was above all about their bodies. It was as bodies that they had been recruited, trained, and deployed. Their job was to injure and to kill bodies, but also to be injured and to be killed. These are, again, they're cogs in a machine. They're replaceable parts. They come in, they come out. They don't mean anything, but they mean something to us because we are watching this story and we get to go along with them.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I think even Lecky says something in Helmet to the effect of like, when you go to war, your job is to die. It's very, all these high-minded ideas of like, we have a just cause, it's honorable, it's glorious, it's whatever. He's like, your job when you go to war is to die or to take lives. But it's really like, that's all it is when boiled down to its very essence. Merc, do you have any World War II books that you would recommend to the people?
Well, so the book that I just quoted, Sheer Misery, Soldiers in Battle in World War II by Mary Louise Roberts, was a fascinating read. Mary Louise is interesting because the first book of hers I read is called What Soldiers Do, which is all about sex during World War II. And she opens up like her intro basically by saying, Stephen Ambrose was a lying bitch, and you can quote me on that. It's a pretty hot take in the, World War II history realm.
Yeah.
That book is also fascinating. The ones that I have next to me on my share right now are 2 books that I love, and then 2 books that are actually in my to-be-read pile. 2 that I love are The Arsenal of Democracy by A.J. Baim, FDR, Detroit, and an Epic Quest to Arm America at War. It's all about the automotive industry and how they geared up to basically build the entire American war machine. It's fascinating. The other one I have here is Lizzie Collingham's The Taste of War, World War II and the Battle for Food. And so that is a social history about how America eats and how it changed during wartime, which I find fascinating. And then the 2 that are still to be read are Defiant Gardens, Making Gardens in Wartime. So it's another kind of social history. It talks about gardening in prisoner of war camps, gardening in several ghettos. And then I have Robert Edsel's Saving Italy, The Race to Rescue a Nation's Treasures from the Nazis. I am by trade and profession a museum person, so anything that involves the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives division is always interesting to me. So those are 2 I recommend and 2 that I'm reading.
I love that. Amazing. Just some really interesting facets of World War II. I mean, I definitely haven't read about any of those things before. Are you reading anything, Mart?
You probably already know the answer to this question is going to be no. I'm too brain foggy to pay attention to anything for longer than 5 minutes. How about you?
Yeah, so I just started. I love buying books from thrift books because you get the most, like, this might be a first edition, this might be a 50-year-old book. Like, it came from a library. It's very, like, it surely had a dust cover at one point. It doesn't have one now. But yeah, it's The Narrow Margin, The Battle of Britain and the Rise of Air Power, 1930 to 1940. And it takes you through the formation of the, like, Luftwaffe, or I guess the rise of the Luftwaffe and the RAF and all that kind of stuff. And then sort of culminates in the Battle of Britain.
Cool.
Yeah.
We haven't done a whole lot of British stuff, so that's why Sam's reading that. Because we need to do a little bit of RAF stuff.
If it helps at all, after the movie Dunkirk came out, I went through what I called my first planes go zoom phase. So I have a list.
I might kick you up on that. How many mortar rounds out of 10 would you rate the Pacific, Merc?
I'm going to give it 7.5 out of 10. It loses a couple points for being disjointed, but gains a number for being extremely personal and easy to connect to.
Love that. Concise.
Very. But also, I think, true. I like it. That brings us to the end of our episode. Merc, thank you so much for being on with us, first of all.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been a joy and a delight. Please have me back.
Definitely.
Thank you, everybody else, for listening again this week. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. You can recommend this episode to a friend. I think you should, because everybody needs to love the Pacific as much as we do. And you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, for more stuff about World War II.
Nailed it.
Thank you for listening. See you next week.
Bye.